Hello, everyone. It's Greg Daly here from RPM Technik and with another one of our series of podcasts. And today I've got with me Colin Hoad from CAT Driver Training. So the clue is in the title of what Colin might do for a living. But without me harping on, do you want to introduce yourself, Colin?
Yes, thank you, Greg. A lot of your customers know, obviously, but perhaps not all. I run a company called Cat Driver Training. We're based at Millbrook Proving Ground, and we offer driver development training in various categories: road, track, race, and a big percentage of our work is for the motor industry,
Hmm.
training engineers how to test and evaluate cars.
And I'm slightly spoiled because I think I've done two courses with you so far. I'm
That's
probably due
right.
a refresher.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
But the story of sort of how cat driver training came about is actually quite fascinating. So, could you give us a sort of a potted history of how you came to be sat where you are?
Yeah, certainly. I can go back a long way, almost to my childhood, really, because my dad was an engineer, and
Hmm.
he was a toolmaker by trade and ran engineering firms. And his interest in engineering and motorsport, as a young man, I used to get taken to watch motor racing. So from the age of 7 to 8 years old, my interest in motorsport was sparked, and really, it's been the basis of my life ever since. In reality, once I left school, um, I have a background in motor engineering, and if I give you just a potted history, perhaps a timeline of how I got to be an instructor.
Mm.
um, I left school and I did an engineering apprenticeship with Rolls Royce, which was aero engines. So I was very happily employed there. I started motor racing at the age of 18, minis, built an oval racing mini with my dad, and I did that until I was around 24 years old. And then I really got the bug, and I could see myself with the engineering knowledge that I had and the expertise I'd formed from Rolls Royce. I went to work for a Porsche specialist
Hmm.
because I wanted to be involved in cars and engineering. And then I did that for around 3 years. I went to a Ferrari specialist, and after that, I went to a Morgan specialist. We did a lot of race preparation work and vehicle builds for motorsport, as well as rebuilding vehicles and servicing and what have you. So I had a good background in vehicle engineering. At the age of 39, I decided it was time to move on from the Morgan world, and I went to Nissan um, as a test and evaluation driver. So I got the job. Looking back, I'm not quite sure how I actually got it, other than the fact that I had a lot of motorsport experience, which is probably what they were looking at the time. And it really was a case of being in the right place at the right time. I stayed at Nissan for 4 years, and in my first year, I got involved in professionally learning how to test and evaluate cars, which is where all of my engineering and vehicle dynamics knowledge started to come into play. I got a pool ticket at the Nürburgring, so I got signed off to drive on the Nürburgring and spent a lot of time on UK and European proving grounds testing cars. Um, I realised that several of the people in my department hadn't had any training, and I offered to write a small driver training program for my department. And to my surprise, it was taken on, and it was taken on as an official Nissan training course at the technical centre where I worked. And
No pressure then.
yeah, there we go. So I can remember, I can clearly remember to this day delivering the first course, thinking, what am I doing here? I've got no instructional ability. I just kind of know how to get a car around the corner. So and it went really well, and I got great feedback. So I'll cut a fairly long story short, but sometime after that, around 6 months after that, Nissan Japan decided they wanted to rationalise the education of engineers their driving globally, America and Europe. There was a
Mm.
lot of training in Japan, and there was virtually none in Europe and America. And Japan used to send engineers over to oversee big events like target setting and sign offs for vehicles. Basically, I put my hand up and I got the job. So, because I had that introduction in, because I'd written a training course, and then that literally changed my life. So, I went through some extensive training with three, as I called them, my Japanese masters. They came over
Yeah.
from Japan and taught myself and another guy and a gentleman from Spain, Nissan Spain, and it literally changed my life. So I really enjoyed it, and I thought, wow, this is really putting together all the things that I've learned in motorsport engineering, car engineering. It seems to have just all come together for me to be able to do this job successfully.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, it's like the Holy Grail with the light coming out the clouds. I was sitting outside Myra. Someone had made a comment to me. I did a driving test, an exam at Myra to get a permit. And the guy that was giving me the test said, "Have you ever instructed?" And then I said, "Yeah, I've started. I'm on that road with Nissan." And he said, "Well, instruct me round the track and tell me what's going on. You know, what you're thinking, what you're doing, how you're responding to the risks, and how you're applying what you know to the cornering technique." And I just talked him round, and he said, "Have you ever thought about doing this for yourself for a living?" And that was it, Greg. That was it. And I sat in the restaurant at Myra, and I went and got a sandwich, and I sat in my car, and it was just one of those light bulb moments. I came home to Joe and said, "I'm going to start a driver training
I've
business."
had an idea, Joe. Sit down.
Exactly, it was
Brace
literally
yourself.
that. She said, "Really? Where are you going with this?" But I can honestly say, I've never felt so positive about doing something in my whole life, and still haven't
Mm.
since that day. So there we go. That's the précis. Um,
Yeah, well, it's,
yeah,
it's it's very interesting, but it's also very relevant because I guess probably that's how. Because how long have we been sort of doing business with you in terms of prepping cars and stuff? Is it
it's
since the
been a
beginning
while.
of CAT?
I think probably we're 16 years old now. I think we
Mm.
probably found you guys, yeah, 6 or 7 years in, I think would
Yeah,
be about
yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. So certainly
But-
10 years or around that,
No,
you know,
exactly.
9, 10 years. Yeah,
But but yeah, I mean, in terms of from I guess your first interaction with Ollie, Ollie's obviously our technical director and always very interested in anything in engineering. And from experience, the way you sort of start your process with a new pupil, which effectively I was, and anyone
yeah,
else that comes to you is it's very much taught from an engineering point of view, if you want it to be at least, which I found quite refreshing actually. It wasn't sort of this is the seat of the pants and this is what will work. It is this is why you do X and that's why the reaction to X will be Y sort of thing.
yeah. That is really the basis and the formula behind everything we do. So
Mm.
we teach you not only how to do something, as we like to say, but we teach you the why.
Yeah.
And I think, I think, there's lots of really good trainers out there. Other great brands are out there, but I think the difference between us and virtually everybody out there, I've obviously done my research and I know my business and I know
Hmm.
my competitors. I think we put an engineering slant on everything we do. So you leave knowing the technical, and then
Yeah. And
we ratchet
I
that up
guess
and down depending on the audience.
yeah, and I guess the other thing that sort of marks you guys different, which I find from obviously when we're selling a Porsche to a new customer, it may well be their first ever performance car, and obviously everyone talks about track days and the pros and cons of it, but there's quite a lot of bravado that goes on a track day, and when I explain to someone you can go and learn your car in the confines of a safe environment, which may mimic a road or even a corner of a circuit in an afternoon in your own time, you can see their eyes light up. And I mean, explaining where you are is that's one of the big features that well attracts me at least to cat driver training at Millbrook because well you can explain the facility better than I, but it's pretty special down there.
It is, and it's there. It's engineering surfaces. There's many circuits we don't use. If people are listening, they've not been to Millbrook. It's 700 acres, and many of the circuits, which we obviously don't use, are designed for testing vehicles in some ways to destruction. So, if you look at the whole format of Millbrook, it's built on the testing and proving of vehicles. So, what we do have is 5 very smooth um, engineered surfaces that we use for training: miles straight, high speed circuit, handling circuit, alpine loops, and then some large dynamic pads. And as you rightly say, once you're there, because it's not a track day, proving grounds work with a heavy emphasis on health and safety. So you can't whiz around a handling circuit at Millbrook and chase someone through a corner like you would on a track day, sitting a metre off their boot. You'd be asked to leave. So
Mm.
we get this lovely environment where you can just do everything in your own time. We always say that we'll dial into your technique, and we meet you there. We can simply see what you're doing and how you're doing it, and then how the course that you've booked applies to your current skill set. and then
Mm.
we work from that point with coaches
And a
where they
lot,
instruct. Yeah,
yeah, and a lot of what you do is, I guess, the way in which your pupil learns is again what I found so interesting to begin with. Before we even sat in a car, I remember we sat down in your classroom and you asked me how I learnt, and I think that's such an interesting way to start a relationship with someone who's
yeah,
trying to teach you something.
yeah. You've got to respect the people you're with. And I'm not saying this for the sake of the conversation. Sometimes it sounds, when I say this, a little sort of a little bit cheesy, but we really genuinely are interested in you and you for the whole time that you're with us. So you're if you I've taken courses. So I've studied driving psychology, Cranfield Uni. I've taken professional coaching courses for driver development, so you understand how coaching in the driving environment works specifically in that environment. So both myself, Paul, and Steve, we all work together. We've all done very similar courses. So you learn, if you coach,
Mm.
that everybody's different, and there's
Yeah.
certain, should we say, brackets that we all fall into. There's different ways that we learn. So some people are visual, some people are like to listen to what's going on. Some people are kinesthetic; they like to do. And then you've got different facets within that. Like some people are reflective, some people are pragmatists. So when you start understanding coaching, if you do it enough, what you quickly do is hone in to how that person works. But you've got to respect the person. So hence we always start with that question. Have
Mm.
you got a preferred way of learning? And then that gives us, you know yourself better than I do, that gives us the heads up on where we might want to um, present the information. So if somebody's a visual and they like to read, then I'll hand over the safety brief and you can read it yourself.
Yeah.
So just simple things like that. And it also helps when you, I'm going off on a tangent here maybe, but when you actually professionally coach, when you've learned to do it, it is so exciting to see it in action and actually be part of doing it, because you can see the results, you accelerate people's learning. So we speak of deep listening, and there's many walks of life where you might want to deep listen, but certainly as a coach doing what we do, if you listen to what somebody says, if they're visual, they might say, oh, I can see that as you're talking to them. So you get clues from the person that actually confirms and backs up how they learn, and then you can just go to work giving them the information presented in the way that's most efficient.
Yeah,
um,
and that's a point that, and sorry to keep harping on
no,
about it,
of
but it's we've obviously trained together,
course
so
we have.
it's
Yeah,
relevant. Is that when you're sometimes have something to explain to you, you can hear the words and you can understand it, but it's not actually until you do it, and maybe two or three times, that you actually understand. Well, at least
agreed.
how I work, how it's going to work, and the beauty of Millbrook, where you could go around a corner 11 times and you
That's
can
it.
probably see it as the instructor and can see it in their eyes that you still quite haven't understood what I've said, but maybe on the 12th time you can do it, and there's no one around, and there's
Yeah.
that safe working space to do it, rather than on a track day where you've got everyone flying around left, right, and centre and undertaking, overtaking you.
Yeah, you've got to create an environment that's easy for people to learn in. So you want to be relaxed. It needs to be comfortable. Non-judgmental. So you're just there to help people. I always say very similar things, and you obviously experience what we do, but yeah, you want people to be able to just absorb themselves into the learning, and it's our job to make that as efficient as we can for the person we're
Mm.
with. So yeah, and
Yeah.
I think also. As you then progress and you get deeper into it and you realize it is a comfortable place to be, you build a rapport with people like we did. You know, you end
Mm.
up you're sitting in someone's space, you're in their car, or potentially they're in our car, but you know, you're sitting a meter apart and you need to get on and you want to help that
Yeah.
person do it. So you've got to find ways to, yeah, to create that comfortable learning environment, which is.
There's a huge element of trust involved in these big metal things because they go quite fast.
There is, but I have to say, a lot of people say to me, "You must be mad sitting with people you don't know." But I'm sure a lot of instructors will get asked that. But
Yeah.
I've got a very simple rule: if I'm feeling uncomfortable, then I'm doing it wrong. So,
Mm. Well,
very,
that's good interest.
yeah, very simple rule: if I'm feeling uncomfortable, work out why, and then deal with it. And
Hmm.
then you very quickly realise it's normally because people are not quite understanding what you've said, and then that's my fault. That's not theirs. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
constantly striving to find ways to keep people engaged and comfortable, and make sure that you get the message across in the right way. And then it isn't that scary, Greg. To be quite honest, I do have occasional scary moments, but not too often. Not too often. Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to some of those moments later if there's any
Well,
you
maybe
can
not.
share
Yeah.
with us.
No. Okay then.
And aside from RPM Technic customers, who
Yeah.
do you work with? Is it from ground up to racer? What's the sort of the
Yeah.
average
Yeah.
customer, if
We
there's such a
it's
thing?
if we look at I'm bound to say this, aren't I? This isn't a marketing plug. I haven't got Joe standing here sort of plying me with marketing slogans, but I think our customers are discerning because there's lots out there,
Yep.
and then it's a matter of finding the right environment for you to work in and for you to learn the things that are relevant to you and what you want to learn. So you need to give value for money, and you need to teach
Hmm.
people something. And the way that we teach, clearly, people buy into that. We're around 5,500 customers, so that kind of tells me we must be doing an okay job. And
Yeah.
then our trust pilots tell us what people think. They can tell the story of Cat far better than I can because it's their own
Hmm.
experiences. But in terms of customers, something in the region at any one time in the year is 60% of our business is teaching engineers how to test and evaluate cars. So
Yep.
we have contracts with OEMs and engineering providers to the motor industry, and that's an ongoing part of our business that really is what Cat's all about. Um,
Hmm.
that cascades down into everything we do. So if you come for a road track or race course, as you know, that's where the engineering basis comes from and how we teach. I think we do lots with like the Porsche Club. So
Yep.
we do lots with the Porsche Club and car forums and clubs. We work with a group of about 10 of those, putting on days for group days through the year. And the Porsche Club are very, very busy with us at the moment. And then I had a lady, I'll give you some examples as long as
Go on.
it's relevant. Yeah, I had a lady arrived in an Audi TT, very nervous. And she said that I go from being super confident to completely unconfident. And I can do that within a mile on the road. And she came just to find confidence really and understand her car and progress, which was successful. She gave a lovely Trustpilot review. A lot of people that come to us are coming to find out about how to drive their car.
Hmm.
And a lot of 911s we seem to have picked up over the years a reputation for understanding those cars. And we get lots of owners of 911s coming to uh, perhaps dispel the myth that the back will always slide before the front. Um, and then on the racing side and the track day side, yeah, we are literally into thousands of customers that we've helped do track days and race. So the racing side, we've had Brit Car champions who have come to find 3/10 for second round Silverstone based on engineering because there's bits they don't understand about how to set a car up. Um,
That's interesting. So rather
yeah,
than technique, they're understanding the car.
yeah, they want to know
Mm.
how to, if I tweak that adjustment on the rebound damping, what relationship does that have with my lap time? And so that's quite a significant part of what we do. Um,
Hmm.
I've raced myself and still do. I always say the same thing. I'm happy to say this on air. I'm not a professional racing driver. I'm a professional engineer. So
Yeah.
I believe that what we offer the motorsport world is something different to what a racing driver will offer. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong in that. It's just a different way of tackling the same issue and what
Yeah.
you that's what they're coming for. And we
Mm.
do a lot of that. We've got a current British touring car. I won't mention his name, but he's been to us for the similar reasons. There's a BTC driver out there who's doing very well. He came for similar reasons. So it's quite specialist what we do. I wouldn't want to make it too specialist because I've taught lots of people to race from ground zero. They've never raced before, and we do a 6-day academy program, and many people have gone through that. But it's
Hmm.
the engineering edge, I think, that seems to win us a lot of business. So, yeah, the engineering side of it is clearly a thing that runs through everything we do. But yeah, I enjoy teaching people on the road as much as I do teaching people to drive on a track because in some ways that's a little bit more rewarding. You're potentially helping people be safer and enjoy their cars on the road, and that's hugely rewarding. So yeah,
Yeah, and 90% of, we get it a lot where a customer may come and buy, for example, a GT3, and their expectation is that they will, they'll be a track junkie living on circuit, whereas the reality is probably they'll be doing 99 road miles to 1 track mile.
yeah,
So that's probably more relevant, really, than the track day to a degree.
agreed. And then what you realise when you do sit in RC is that um, a lot of the skills that you use on the road. So if we think of formulating a plan to drive around a corner, observing, forward planning, observation, positioning, without breaking the rules in the highway code, you can practice many of the skills that you need on a track. So
Mm,
there is an overlap, and that overlap is often a lot bigger than people realise. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you're absolutely right. You can really enjoy yourself on the road quite safely within speed limits, just simply by practicing and perfecting technique that you might one day use on the track. So yeah,
No,
totally agree
it's all
with that.
relevant.
Yeah,
And for those people who might be listening in the future, currently it's just June, actually, June 2020. So we're entering the sort of the release of the lockdown phase that
yeah,
has been a very strange period for us all. So with businesses reopening now, obviously health and safety is paramount for all of the obvious reasons. But you guys have obviously had to look into this in depth, and sharing a car with
yes,
another human. How,
absolutely.
how have you worked it out?
Because we work for the motor industry, we've been audited for health and safety on a regular basis by companies. If it's a new company and they want to work with us, they might send their health and safety people in first to audit us to see that we're a safe and responsible company. So I think a health and safety process, policy, procedure is good, because I've had enough people look to see that we're doing the right thing. And
Mm,
based on that background, I've with Joe written a 10-page health and safety document that is going to go out on our website, so people are more than happy to access that to see what we've done, and fellow instructors, if they want to see it, what we've done, are more than happy with that.
hmm
We've presented that to two industry clients, and they both said that they feel that we've covered the risk the best we can, and they're happy to send people to us when the world opens back up. Um, the basis of it is to reduce the time in car if we don't
Yep.
need to spend time sitting together. So what I've actually done, I've come up with a 7-zone plan. From the moment you arrive at the gate to the moment you leave, it's separated into 7 zones, and we've mitigated the risk in each zone. So each instructor has have a thermometer and will record their temperature before they start work, before they come into work, to make sure that they're not showing symptoms. When the customer
Yep.
arrives, we take their temperature, or they take their temperature, to make sure they're not showing signs. And really, on that basis, we work our way through the day, reducing the time that we spend together. So, a very simple example: we run a combi van for collecting people from the gate and bringing them up to our base in Loop 3. I put a screen in the back of the car, Lexan, the same as you make race windows out of. So now there's a
Yep.
divide between us. We do the demos in that now, so that the people are sitting behind us and not next to us in the vehicle.
Oh, what,
Um,
when you go around
when you go
around
around
the
the circuit,
facility?
I
Yeah.
put a central screen in our Nissan 350Z, to reduce the exposure sitting next to each other, and that's not within where the airbag would deploy, so that's safe. And then both in our Jaguar, we've got a Jaguar and a Vauxhall Astra Turbo. In those cars, I put a screen in the back, and believe it or not, I've done a trial run. It will work on some circuits. We're going to sit in the back if people are using our cars, engineers. Uh,
Okay.
for some of the exercises, we're taking every hour, we get out the car for 5 minutes and open the doors, and the whole day is structured to give people the correct amount of time in car learning, but reduce the time that we're spending sitting next to each other. And that's how we're doing it. So it seems as I say, I've done a trial run, and we've got masks we've had made for us, so everybody gets a mask as they come into base. They get gloves, although I think the gloves aren't as successful as I thought they would be, and not necessarily essential. So the
hmm
gloves might be a modification to the document, but everything else seems to work. So uh, I think customers will be happy. If we're working in
Good.
your car, then we won't be opening our doors until the 1st of July
hmm
for one-to-ones in individuals' cars. And then I believe if the numbers are down and the government reduce, the lockdown, then I think we'll be back in business hopefully from the 1st of July. But I'm an approved driving instructor. ADI, you need to be to do this job, and driving instructors out on the road aren't allowed to work yet officially, and they think we'll be back to work mid-June stroke end of June. So once the DVSA say driving instructors can go back to work, then I'll feel comfortable going back to work, shall we say, legally or within the guidance of the government. And we've got a health and safety policy that I've put into practice, and will very rigidly work to that. So we've done the best we can, and I genuinely think we have. I've spent it took me a whole week to write the policy, and then a further 3 days at Millbrook running through it all to make it work. So I've put 8 days of time into it. So it's not something I've just done on a whim. It's taken all my time.
Well done, mate. Well,
yeah,
fingers crossed everything goes smoothly for you all.
Sure, and you're the same, I'm sure, with customers collecting cars and workshop, and
yeah, we've been very I's and T's on it for all of the obvious reasons, and above all safety. But it's important that everyone adheres to it. So it's just finding ways to make it work and continue to be positive. But I thought we'd have a chat about how, and this might be a short conversation, but how driving techniques from a tutor's point of view might have changed over the last, let's say, 30 years with car development. So, for example, in our little bubble of Porsches, 3.2 Carrera 964 30-year-old car, very, very different machine to a 992. Has it changed?
That's a brilliant question. And that allows me to perhaps just draw on some of my own experiences as a young man driving. And I often do that. I naturally do that because, I think the oldest car I've trained in was a 1936 Alvis with a lady that was going to do the Paris to Peking rally.
Brilliant.
Yeah, all the way up with cable brakes, I'll add. And I had to pump the suspension from the passenger seat, the oiler for the suspension. So I don't know if you've ever seen, very recently, very sadly, Sterling Moss died, and there was lots of pictures and films of him on the telly, and there's a picture of him getting out from a race when he takes his goggles off. His eyes are white, he looks like a panda bear, and the rest of his face is black. Well, I look like that when I get out of this Alvis. So it had aero screens, and some of the oil eventually found its way back in the car from the front of the car. And so that was one example, all the way through to sitting in brand new, GT2s, GT3 RSs. So that experience is wide for myself and for Paul. If I think I work, as I said, I work for a Porsche specialist, and I can remember road testing cars, and I would have been around 24, 25 years old, and it's something I've never forgotten. So there am I, road testing a 3.3 turbo that I've just serviced, going up Amersham Hill in the wet, which is a very steep, long gradient. And I can remember I accelerated from second, and when it hit boost, the wheels spun, into third. When it hit boost, the wheels spun, and I carried on doing that through fourth. And I thought it would be so easy just to literally drive this car off the road with 1 or 2 seconds of exuberance on the throttle.
Yeah.
And if I've always got that in my head as a benchmark. So when you get in cars without ESP, any kind of stability program, active driver aid, then that's what sits with me. So I believe I think it's I might be going off on a tangent here, Greg, so pull me back if I am. But because I've worked for a manufacturer, and then you realise that there's around about 10, 11, 12 significant departments that all deal with certain aspects of the car when it's produced. It'll be no different to Porsche. So if you think of NVH, how just noise vehicle harshness sitting in a car has changed in terms of the noise levels and the wind noise, and how we've got clever at making rubber seals that shut the noise out. And let's think about things that stick with me. As I said, I remember reading a report years ago when I think it was M Sport, Malcolm Wilson, who does all the rally prep for Ford. I think it was an engineering magazine, and they launched the new Focus, and then M Sport were turning them into rally cars, and they basically modified the chassis of the car. The body of the car. and they made it 20% more torsionally rigid without a roll cage, because they worked out that if they put certain pieces of metal here and there, they could make the car more rigid.
Hmm.
And then they took that and put that into the production Focus. So going back to, Mark One Focus era, manufacturers were making a car more torsionally stiff, and now think how that has moved on in terms of a Cabrio 911 that almost feels as rigid as a fixed head coupe. So if we start thinking about how all these things have come together, that's how my mind works. So when you're teaching people, if you look at an 80s, a 90s, a 2000, a 2010, a 2020 car, you can see the quality and the integrity of the engineering layering up over 10-year periods. So I think it's good as an engineer to be mindful of that when you're teaching. I'll give you another example. Again, I think it's relevant to the conversation because I'm going to talk about a Carrera GT. So I drove one of those cars on a racetrack, something in the region of 11, 12 years ago, and drove it quickly with a customer sitting by my side. And they're clearly, they were at the time the kind of pinnacle of what people thought to be, potentially hazardous thing to drive and very oversteery. But with warm tyres on a warm track, they were just beautiful to drive, and you could power gently out of a corner and get the rear wheels just to break grip, and it would slide out of a corner. I'm not talking, water roll slides. I'm just talking gently feeling the tyres working underneath you, and it just left me with a lovely feeling about the car. Now, if you think of the ESP system on that car, think of the computing power and the storage power and the speed that things could react through sensors in the 2000s, and then compare it with current day.
Yeah.
Last December, my customer bought one, and I was at Millbrook on the steering pad in a cold, wet December day, and he's turned up in a Carrera GT, and I thought, well, I'm okay with that. I can handle
Just
that.
your normal day at the office, Colin.
Well, it's a posy thing to talk about, but it is relevant to the conversation. So my customer I've done lots with, and he's got some nice cars, and we've done some race prep, and he races, and we've done lots of things together. So there's a high element of trust there. He said, you drive it on the pad and tell me what you think of it, and that will help you coach me. So I don't mind saying this on air. So I jump in it. I said, is the ESP on? He said, do you want it on? I said, yeah, leave it on, because we're just learning the car. And I put my foot on the gas pedal on the circle on the steering pad, and I spun quicker than I could blink. And that was with the ESP on. So there's my point. So we did it 3 or 4 times, and then I realised the ESP is processing power, and it's how it intervenes to help you is so slow that it almost feels like it's not there.
Yeah.
If you now get in a modern vehicle and you think, let's now push on, the ESP will pull you back, and sometimes you don't even know it's intervening. Its intervention is so smooth and so fast and so clinical, and all those layers of clever software that react in a nanosecond, they pull it all back, and you can't really feel it working. Then you might have an EDIF that is now sorting out the drive at the rear, and all that complex computing power is working for you. So if I come back to your question, then I think it's important as an instructor coach to be able to actually categorize what you're in and understand its strengths and its weaknesses, because that will, without question, influence your day. So if I then talk to if somebody comes in an older vehicle, you think, oh, that could bite us, then you're very interested in the customer's experience. So we coach. So rather than me just saying this could be quite dangerous, I will say, are you aware of how your car works? And what are you, ask the question, you coach, what are you expecting this car to do at grip limit? And then you get their response back. And I think, well, I don't think it's going to do that. It's not going to do A, it's going to do B. And then, would you like to try this out on a steering pad before we go onto the handling circuit? And normally people, common sense, I'd love to. So then you get on the pad and you can start working it all out together. But if I was in a very modern car and a customer has very limited experience and the PSM is on and the traction's on, I just go straight on the handling circuit, because I know the car's going to hold it all back for me. So I think what we can also look at, stop me if I'm talking too much, Greg.
No, it's interesting, mate. I will stop you if I'm bored, though.
Yeah, don't do that. You're on and I'll change the subject. What I'm very interested in, and I think it's a relevant conversation for road, track day and race, is the time element of all this. So what I'm very interested in is working to the vehicle, the dynamic of the vehicle, and I think of time and distance, or speed and distance, or time and
Hmm.
space. So if a car kicks into some kind of reaction to what you've done, or you've exceeded grip limit, then how much time does it give you to respond? And I think that's also quite often
It's an
how we,
interesting point.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's how we can start to dial into how cars work dynamically. If you jump in a 27 RS, a 70s 27 and RS, I've done it myself. I'm reasonably embarrassed to say I've spun a couple of 911s, and they've spun quicker than I can blink, because they're older cars on older tyres on simplified suspension. So if
Hmm.
we think of a torsion bar 911, an early 911, when you come off the gas, the wheels want to go into not negative camber, they go into positive camber. They've
Yep.
got a very simple arm just hanging the wheel on. There's no complex multi-link suspension to keep the tyre flat on the ground as the suspension deflects. So as you start to think about driving those vehicles, you might not get the time you need to react if you make an error. Whereas I think in a modern vehicle, unless it's a racing car, obviously
Hmm.
if it's a Carrera Cup, then these words, it's the same as driving an earlier vehicle. But if I'm in a road 911 or a road Porsche product and I make an error, not only have I got the vehicle assisting me, I've also got time generally. You could obviously hit a patch of diesel on the road or hit a piece of black ice, but as a rule of thumb, you get time to work. And I think the more knife edge, like a GT2 RS, the more knife edge a car becomes, the less time you get as a driver.
Hmm.
Consequently, then your skill set needs to be higher to manage the car. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if a client's objective is to grip limit drive, what we're talking about is part of our risk assessment. Yeah, is it an
Yeah.
80s,
Because
90s car? Yeah,
Yeah, because I always think with and this may not be correct, but I always think with the more modern 911s, it's maybe easier to get to maybe 85, 90, maybe 95% of the car's performance, but extracting that last 5% out of, for example, a 911 GT2 RS or something is far harder than getting it out of the air cooled car. And I guess thinking about it as you're talking is probably because of the time what you're talking about there. If you're traveling through the same corner 30% quicker, you've got
yes,
30% less time to react to a problem.
yes, that's very true. So when people start racing, I always suggest racing a car that gives you time to work. So if
Mm.
you've got 150 horsepower in a race car, whatever happens, you've probably got time to respond and react and start to understand the dynamic of what you're driving. If you drive something that you jump in a cup car as your first race car, before you can blink, the car's doing something. You haven't got time to work it out. So
Yes.
I hear what you're saying. I wouldn't disagree with that. Although I suppose the only way I might not necessarily disagree, just add a bit of light and shade to that comment, would be if you want to extract the last 5% out of anything, it normally takes an exponential amount of skill to do that when compared to driving at 95%.
True. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I
if
agree with
you
that.
if you drove a Rover 25 race car and you're looking for a half a second, say 3 seconds in a lap, and you think, oh well, I can find that, and then if the lap time that the winning drivers are doing is 3/10 faster, that's the bit that always takes the
The
you know
pain to get
the
to.
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pain. Exactly. So I think what modern cars give us is that envelope is much wider. You can
Hmm.
do a lot more with the car and not have it bite you.
Yeah.
Whereas,
No, fair.
yeah,
That's a fair counter. And
yeah,
I mean, you touched on it earlier. Sometimes, and it's still, I don't know why, but it still surprises me when people say that. Oh, isn't a 911 a bit wayward at the limit? And maybe we are spoiled. Actually, we're not. It's not a maybe that we're around them so much that I actually think our 911 drives is normal compared to
you will,
another
won't you?
car.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think?
Your brain map is mapped to
Mm.
drive a 911, isn't it? Repetition, repetition, repetition. So your brain has opened up all the neurological pathways for you to be able to drive that car without thinking about it, and that has become your normal. Whereas, yeah, man, I can talk for England on this subject. If you think about driving a 911, I believe a 911 is probably the driver's car, because if you understand how to get the best out of them and how they work, then the car comes alive, as you know, as your
Mm.
customers know. if you're not armed with that knowledge and you drive it perhaps the same way you drive a Golf R, we do it on a regular basis. Your customers have been to us and said, I can't believe how good this car is. Now that I've trail braked into a corner or found the aero advantage at speed and found the pinpoint sharp balance at grip limit as you just tip in and out of the gas a millimetre and the car rotates a little bit of left, a little bit of right, as it like a barbecue skewer through the roof of the car, and it just rotates. So all those things are what a 911 brings us. And I think you need to know how to get the best out of it. So that's, if I drove perhaps a Ferrari 488, I mean, they're amazing cars. Sorry to talk about Ferraris on a Porsche discussion, but
No. We've got a broad brush here, Colin. Don't
yeah,
worry.
I think they're a little easier to manage because they're not designed in a way that requires an elevated level of driving skill to get the best out of them. Whereas I think a 911, when you understand them and you dial into what they want from you and how you can manipulate them, I think they're to me, they're the ultimate driver's car. So in terms of driving one and feeling safe and understanding how they work, I think you've got lots to learn. Once you've learnt it, then you can start to exploit the car, but not necessarily in a dangerous way. The comment about the rear kicking out, what's interesting, if you do a club day and you've got 6 911 owners, and we always, as you know, objectives, and then we go around the room on a club day and say, what would you like to get from the day? And if you've got 6 911 owners there, normally 3 of them will say, I'm nervous about the back of the car kicking out on a corner and I want to discover what it does. And then at the end of the day, when we do the wrap up and say, what did you learn today? Most of them say, I can't get the back out on my car. All it wants to do is understeer. So, and that is fact. That's what people will find. Clearly, the engine sits in the back, but if we think of the logic, they got longer, they got wider. Any sports car, any quality sports car, generally, if it's rear-wheel drive, will have narrower tyres on the front than the rear. That instantly starts to suggest the vehicle's going to understeer because there's less rubber on the front tyres. And then, as we know, I know you know this, but just for the benefit of perhaps people that are listening that don't, when a manufacturer designs a vehicle and produces it for use on the public highway, then its dynamic characteristic, it's signed off as a vehicle that is going to understeer virtually every car you buy.
And it's such an interesting point because we often get it whereby might be on a track day and I'll be having a natter with a new customer and we'll ask if they've had the Geo set up and they'll say, oh no, it's a 6-month-old car with 1,000 miles on it, and they almost look at me as if I'm fishing for work. But it's exactly what you just said. It's not set up out of the box to do its best. It's set up to be safe.
Yes, bang on. And that, I think, is again it's just another part of the integrity of the engineering that I respect with a Porsche product, because if you buy most other products, you haven't got that level of adjustment and then dynamic change. We can change toes and tracks and cambers, and we can change many things on a car, but look how brilliant those cars are, that if a driver wants a hint more neutrality in a corner at a grip limit, your production car can be adjusted to give you what you want. Yeah, and anybody listening who adjusts cars, of course, you can do that with an MX-5, but I don't believe you can do that in the same way as you can with a 911, because you can actually tailor almost the setup to what the driver wants. You know as well as I do, a GT3 RS out the box is an understeery car. On track, it becomes quite annoying. You give it a track Geo, you've got a different car again, haven't you?
Massively different, and that again sort of blows your mind slightly when you sit with someone like yourself or a pro race driver, like obviously we do a lot with Tim Harvey, and then you see them actually pushing past that 95% point. And what the thought that always comes into my mind is, from spending too much time with you, I think, Colin, is that how did the engineer have a wide enough imagination to work out how fast this car could actually go to set up the parameters of the system? It boggles the mind.
Yeah, there's a lot in there now that if you look at testing, I mean, this is our bread and butter. These are the conversations we have almost daily. So if you look at how cars are developed, we've now got very accurate computer modelling. We've got an understanding of computer tyres. We can model tyre configurations and how they work, and sidewall stiffness and all these things are on models now. So there's kinematics rigs where vehicles are sitting on shaker rigs with the wheels going up and down and rotating, and they're going through a motorway cycle or a road cycle. And then we got simulation, so we can perhaps simulate a dynamic characteristic on a, you know, a 4-axis simulator with a professional driver driving the car. So if you actually look how testing has evolved, I think it's safe to say from a professional view that there's less, shall we say, proof testing and developing done with the, you know, licking your finger and sticking it in the air and driving around a test.
You're not allowed to do that anymore, Colin.
No, oh no, of course you're not. Well done. I've got my gloves on. You're right. You're bang on. So there's less, you know, people
See
know
the pants.
Yeah, people know the beast they've made. So when we think about testing vehicles, you've got all that behind. Then you're into your test and development work on the proving ground, just to maybe validate what you've done. But yeah, I think it's fair to say, I'm not sure. I've never worked for Porsche. I've obviously understand the product, but you know, it wouldn't be unusual for a manufacturer, a top line manufacturer, if they're doing damper tuning with a new product. If I go back, so let's go back 15 years, it wouldn't be unusual to do something in the region of 50, 60 to 100 valve changes on an evaluation test on a public highway across Europe.
Good Lord.
Yeah, that wouldn't be unusual. So if I go back to my Nissan days, Nissan didn't do quite so much of it, but certainly other manufacturers did. I know that because I used to work with different testers. So what would happen, let's say, you know, it's all old history now, I'm not giving away anything I shouldn't. The new Ford Focus at the time, I'll quote this, I don't think I'm going to get myself into trouble. They took the van and the Ford Focus across Europe because manufacturers need to test vehicles in the environment they're going to be driven. So you might need Belgian roads, French roads, German roads, Spanish roads. So you drive across Europe in your development cars with the Olins or whoever van it is behind you with all the valves in, and the engineers make it happen on the road. That's what used to happen. I think the new Fiesta at the time was something like 46 rear valve changes and 96, I think it was, front changes before they ended up where they wanted to be. Wow. So now if you take that, now that's starting to diminish to the point that, because people are so clever with their modelling now, and we understand in the engineering at a level through sensors and how we can accrue data on a vehicle dynamically, then that a lot of that work is now done on test beds and on computers. So yeah, it's a slightly different. So just sort of talking about how people test cars. Yeah, that's what's going on. So
because you think with, sorry, Colin.
No, go on. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because you think with electric cars now. First of all, there's a bit of a two-part to this one. First of all, is there a different way of driving them because there's not there's not the same engine braking, but also in theory, with the amount of torque and power that's potentially available from them, they've got to have higher limits, which potentially, as you just said, they're theorized, they're not tested by a human. So the car could, in theory, go a lot faster than the human would ever dare.
Yes, I think. I think we're slowly. This is just my opinion, and I'm not sure it's worth anything. But just in the environment I work in, I'm getting the vibe like Mazda have now decided that their electric vehicles will just behave like a normal petrol Mazda. They're not giving us. I read that about 6 months ago. I think the electric vehicles that Mazda are making just behave like a normal Mazda, a combustion engine Mazda. So I'm just wondering if the excitement of giving us massive torque from 0 miles an hour is going to fade away. I think in road cars, I'm not sure we're going to be perhaps experiencing that as we develop into more mainstream. You know, people driving them as a mainstream vehicle. But you're right in terms of the driving. You haven't got engine braking, but you've got regen braking. So if you drive, so now we're working with engineers that develop these vehicles. So a problem that you can have is when they're setting the parameters for that regen, if the battery is empty or fully charged, you'll get different levels of regen. So then that equates to a different braking feel to the driver. You can have now, we speak of one pedal driving. You don't need to touch the brake pedal in an electric car. I think
I've not driven anything like that, but is that sort of aggressive? Is it that you come off and
that's the norms? I think Nissan are producing a one pedal car, aren't they? Where you don't really use the brake pedal. It's got a brake pedal, but you won't need to use it because the
Yeah.
regen is doing it all for you. So yeah, I think you knew the one of the BMWs, the electric BMW. I think when they launched that was I think that was the fastest accelerating car from something like 0 to 25 miles an hour. So
Hmm.
there's clearly the possibility that. Well, interestingly enough, I won't mention any names as I never do, but we worked with an industry client, and they had a pool car that was the BMW, one of the early BMW electric cars, and they couldn't work out why everybody wanted to drive it. It just kept booked out, and nobody wanted anything else because it was lightning quick from a standing start, and people were enjoying driving it. So we ended up doing a course for them on safe driving of an electric vehicle because so many
Oh.
people were then wanting just to experience the whizzing of the acceleration. So
Hmm.
yeah, you raise a good point. I think a slightly different, an adjustment to your driving style. I think the fundamentals of driving an electric car in terms of how we behave as humans and our interpretation of the road isn't going to change. But certainly from a technical aspect, then there'll be some changes to, and also for those changes that we might need to respond to. But I think also the challenge for the manufacturers is perhaps make them behave how we're used to cars behaving. So
Yeah, so they'll engineer it to make it
yeah,
how our brains are used to.
they're already looking at gearboxes for electric cars because an electric motor spins at a certain speed, and then the frequencies within the motor and how it charges. I'm not sure exactly the reasons, but there's certainly a benefit in having the electric motor spinning at certain RPMs and not falling out of band either way. So
Yeah.
now there's manufacturers they're producing them, they're developing gearboxes for electric cars. So I think we're really just at the start of it. Although we can look at a Tesla product, they're out there, we're driving them, but I think they're going to develop again in
Hmm.
terms, over the next 10 years. I think we'll see advancements. There's less moving
And
parts. Yeah, certainly.
yeah, and a bit like because I think we spoke about it. I love bikes, and a few years ago, I can't remember how many years ago, maybe 10 years ago now. One of the riders, it might have been Valentino Rossi or Marquez. Well, they sort of developed where they dangle a leg as they come into a
Yeah,
corner, and worked out that they could stabilize the bike and so on and so forth. And likewise, body positioning on a bike.
yeah,
Marquez was renowned as a modern rider for practically getting his head on the deck.
yeah.
So it's a lot more obvious with a bike because you can see the rider working it. Has there been anything like that within sort of the race driving world that has been, well, that guy's doing things a bit differently, and it's translated into a sort of a trend, or is it
Um,
sort of been the same?
I think that's a good question. That's a good question. If you look at the magazines, if you look at what you see on the internet, I think, yeah, I think a lot of racing drivers will teach the fundamentals in a very similar way because that's how it's always been done. So,
Hmm.
if you look at taking a corner, um, yeah, I'm not choosing my words to be polite. I'm just choosing my way how to describe it. Um, if we take a 90-degree corner, what I think has
Hmm.
become more involved in terms of teaching and educating people in how to race. You can buy books, you can look at the internet, you can look at tutorials on the internet, and I believe most of the race instructors out there that have got a good handle on what they do, they race well. They might not have, should we say, in-depth engineering knowledge. I do believe there's a formatted way of teaching people that doesn't necessarily involve the most modern way of thinking. So,
Okay.
and we teach engineers this. So, this isn't just about racing. This is perhaps about employing techniques to optimize a vehicle platform through a corner to get the best out of the platform of the car. So,
Hmm.
I'll give you a very clear example. I'm sorry it's not a Porsche product. Think of a
It's
Nissan
okay.
GTR R35. It's four-wheel drive. If you turn the steering wheel more than 15 degrees in any direction, it starts to bias the drive to the rear.
Okay.
So now,
This is a predetermined setup in the car.
yeah, that's how
Yeah. Yeah.
they're designed to work. So what you really want to do when you come out of a corner is have the four-wheel drive working for you as
Hmm.
efficiently as you can. So if you take a conventional line, imagine that 90-degree apex corner line that you see in all the books and the tutorials. if you were to take that line through a corner in a GTR, you'd spend a lot of time with the steering wheel not straight, and the steering wheel wouldn't be straight until you were out of the bend and on the straight. Then you get your four-wheel drive back.
Yeah.
So the reason it's done is to reduce understeer, because most, as you know, like a Land Rover, a four-wheel drive car would understeer. So if you in a GTR just sneak a bit nearer to the corner before you turn, what in effect you do, you make the entry to the corner a little sharper, but you make the exit a little straighter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is that making sense as I'm
Yeah,
explaining that?
perfectly
Yeah,
sense.
there
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go. So now in a GTR, you can get on that gas way earlier than the driver that's taking a conventional line. So if you've got two drivers and one understand how to tickle away at getting the lap time out of a GTR, just by a small adjustment in your line, you can get a quicker lap. Now, if I take that in,
But
yeah, go on.
I was going to say, and then effectively that all comes back to your understanding of the engineering of the car you're driving.
That's true.
Because if you didn't know that it did that, you'd constantly be thinking, "Why is he faster than I am?" If
Exactly.
you're racing the car.
Exactly. Now, if you take that into, let's say, a 911, and the driver is conventionally driving a 911 on that line, and you've induced understeer, and perhaps you're a straight line braker. If you straight line brake and power on before you enter the corner, as you said, you can lift the nose of the car. Your 911 won't go around the corner; you'll be understeering through it. If you trail brake, if you finish some of your braking into the turn, now, if you think, let's think about the engineering of that. Most modern sports cars have anti-dive and squat built into the suspension. So
Mm-hmm.
when you read about trail braking, often people are telling us it loads the outside front wheel. It's way more complex than that, because the anti-dive and the complexity of the suspension is actually hunkering the car down pretty flat and square. You can't defy physics. The nose pulls forward. Now,
Mm-hmm.
thinking the way we position the calipers, sometimes it's for packaging. It can't always be as I'm describing it. But if you put a brake caliper at the front of a front wheel, the car will, polar moment of inertia, the car, it's like putting a spoke in someone's push bike. They're going to go over the handlebars.
Yep.
If I put the caliper at the back of the front wheel, the car will try and squat down under braking.
Mm.
Then if I put the rear caliper at the front of the rear wheel, the car now squats. It doesn't try to tip forward so much and load up the front tyres. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you've got anti-dive, you've got squat
Mm-hmm.
built into the suspension, you've got your brakes all cleverly working to keep the car hunkered down. Now, if you trail brake in, you're pulling the whole car down into the corner. That opens up a multitude of different lines in the corner for you to be able to trail brake in and straighten the exit, because you get rid of that understeer and that push by squatting the car down. You load up the front of the car, and now we can accelerate through the turn and way out of the turn earlier than the guy that's just braked in a straight line. So there's a
I
couple of,
can.
yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say I could sit here listening to you all day, Colin.
Well,
I
there's a
remember when I
reason.
came.
It's
I remember when I
very
came and did
nice
the
of you to say
tuition.
so. But as you can probably
We
tell, I'm enjoying it as much as you, because I can talk for England on all this. So I love talking about it, and I love what I do. So when there's nothing better than explaining this to somebody who's bought a 911 and they don't know this, and then the car literally comes alive in their hands, and you can
Mm.
see the joy on their face. I think I might have said this to you, Guy, but I don't think it was one of your customers, but it could have been. But a gentleman came for training, and he said he owned a Golf R, and he said, I'm going to sell it. He said, it doesn't go around a corner. I said, well, okay, that's interesting. Tell me about that. And then I'm sitting there listening. I thought, well, you must be a straight line breaker. And I explained roughly what I've just said to you in a very short and
Mm.
racy version, because we're going to go out and do it on the track. And then basically we made our way through the course. And by the end of the day, he was trail braking with the tyres chirping on the handling circuit into the corner, extolling the virtues of a 911 handling characteristic. So there's nothing more rewarding, like talking now. There's
Mm.
nothing more rewarding than bringing a car alive for somebody who thinks they bought the wrong car. It's just. But
Yeah,
getting back
and
to
I,
you, sorry, yeah, just say getting back to your comment. The idea is when you race, which is it's not a new idea. Professional, Callum Lockie and all those professional racing drivers who race, they know it. It's their bread and butter. But taking the lateral load out of a tyre at the earliest opportunity, so that you can get on the power and drive through the corner, is part of the modern way of teaching race instruction.
mm,
So if we think of that as in answer to your question, you think of Sebastian Loeb in a rally car. I'm sure there were people doing it before him, but he straight line corners in a rally like he was on a race circuit. and
Yeah.
that's where his speed came from. You could argue his accidents were bigger, but he couldn't adjust the car in the turn as a conventional rally driver would. But yeah, there's definitely modern ways of thinking. But I think my point is the modern thinking, I think, also comes with modern engineering and how cars have advanced and how tyres have advanced,
Yeah.
how cars behave. You know, we can make dampers now. Engineers make dampers so efficient and so accurate at helping to keep the tyre flat on the ground that perhaps we're no longer, you know, driving a vehicle to compensate for problems and how it behaves because that's how it's designed. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the problems that were in cars 20 years ago have been engineered out, which leaves us perhaps in some ways an easier route into finding speed, less nuances to worry about. But there's certainly some modern thinking in terms of how to get quickly through a corner. Absolutely.
Mm, yeah. And we touched on it earlier, but you must have had some interesting escapades over the years. Is there any
Uh,
that spring to mind that you could share with us?
what could I share? I've shared them with quite a few people.
None of mine, Colin.
Absolutely not, Greg. You were perfection personified. Uh, I just funny things have happened to me that I probably wouldn't share, but one that always springs to mind, and it can't be only me that did it. I think other people have said this, so you might have heard it before. But when I started instructing, um, let me flip that round. I did a NLP course, neuro linguistic programming course, to assist me in becoming a better coach instructor, and um, the guy did it. We did it as a contra. So he wanted to learn some advanced driving, and this guy instructed NLP. So we did it. We did it as a contra. I did some work with him on the road, and he did some work with me. And the problem that I encountered on many an occasion was when I asked somebody to brake, they didn't brake, and he identified the fact that I wasn't giving them a positive command. So it was definitely worth doing this training because
Mm,
what you should say is now brake. You give a positive command, you get a positive reaction. So once I learned how to give the right wording, which is all part of the job, I suppose, then that kind of evaporated away. So, and I always say on my briefing, if you hear me say now brake, just get on the brake, and we'll talk about the reason why after. So
It's just before you go on, that's such an interesting comment because anyone who maybe has done my job before, you sometimes sit next to somebody when you
there you
swap
go.
over for
So
a test drive and you say, pop your foot on the clutch and they weld the brake pedal to the
yeah,
bulkhead. And you're like, that's the brake, that one. And they're
yeah,
like, oh yeah, what am I doing? And it always never fails to make me chuckle, but everyone does
yeah.
it, or a lot of people do it.
Yeah. Plus, also, you're in a similar environment because they could be nervous about driving that wonderful
True.
car they're about to drive, and
Mm.
they're
Anyway, sorry.
under scrutiny, aren't they? Because you're sitting next to them. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You people's might have an elevated emotional state there, and you get the same result. But yeah, prior to all this, I was driving around the handling circuit, and this particular gentleman. I mean, we had wheels on the grass. And it went on for a few laps, and I was quite green. I hadn't been doing this job very long. It was years ago, and I was basically saying to him, "Brake, brake, brake." So, and I'm sitting there thinking, this guy's not responding. I wonder what's going on. We pulled back in the handling circuit, and I said, "If you don't mind me saying, for the last 3 laps, I've been saying brake, brake, brake. Why aren't you stopping?" He said, "Oh, brake." He said, "I thought you were saying great, great, great." So, yeah, there we go. That is true.
The art of communication.
There you go. And it normally is that, but I've had some funny moments, and then you chuckle about them afterwards. And sometimes you're chuckling with the customer because you just perhaps misunderstood each other. But
Yeah.
as a rule of thumb, you know how we work. It's all very safe. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, on a serious note, again, I don't mind talking about this. I think it's good for people to hear it in some ways. I was with a customer in a McLaren, a
Mm.
675 LT at Silverstone, and this gentleman had never done a track day before. Did plenty of training with me, and then we went to track, and he got his McLaren, and there we are going down the Hanging Straight on his very first track day at 160 miles an hour. And I looked across and said, "Are you okay with this?" And he said, "No, not really." He said, "I can't believe you're doing 160 miles an hour." I said, "Well, it's interesting you said that. I was thinking that as well. Perhaps we could save that for like 1 or 2 track days on when you got the hang of it." There was nothing wrong with his driving. He was absolutely safe. He was respectful. Obviously didn't want to damage his car, but that's another an area that you just don't realise unless you get on track. It'd be same as a GT3 RS. 160 miles an hour is just not an issue for that car. So
Mm.
if you're new to track driving or you've not experienced that level of performance before, those are the moments I believe that can catch you out. Whether that's the owner driving on their own, or when you're with an instructor, you need to keep an eye on the speedo, because
Yeah.
it's so effortlessly fast, and quite often you've only got a lap and diagonal belt on. So where I've over the years felt that it's quite hard unless you're in a real full-on race car to reach your level of tolerance for safety, I find myself doing it more and more now. Maybe because I'm getting older, but I think when I'm doing 160 miles an hour and I haven't got a hands device and my race suit and a full face helmet, I'm just sitting with a lap and diagonal belt. But
You
look
feel a
at
bit naked.
yeah, exactly. And it just, again, really based on the conversations we've been having for the hour, just modern cars, modern 911s are just mega quick, and
Yeah.
you sit in them, and it's hard to appreciate that. I think if you drive them on the road, but you've never done maybe a track day, then I'm all for track days, because it gives you a chance to experience what your car's really about in a safe
Yeah.
environment. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Well, all interesting stuff, and as I said, I genuinely could sit here chops in for hours. But yeah, well, I suppose we should probably pause it there, because
okay.
we could leave this for a part two maybe later on in the year,
Very
or
happy
next
for a
year.
part two. Perhaps we could talk about driving technique and things that relate to getting the best out of a 911. We could again talk for hours on that.
I'm writing it down as we speak, Colin. Well,
Okay,
thanks for your time, mate. It's
my
really
pleasure.
appreciated, and obviously, I hope it, or when the reopen happens in full, you're back to business as
Well,
normal, which I imagine you will be.
yeah, who knows what the next 2 years will bring, but certainly short term. Joe's taken 5 bookings this week, so
Happy days.
yeah, I'm sure you'll be the same. I hope you guys are going to keep safe and find ways to do the great job that you do, and keep the safety in mind as well.
Super. Well, thanks, Colin, and we'll catch up with you soon. Take care, mate.
Okay, take care, Greg. Bye.
Bye.